Sit down for a moment, not because something outside is about to shake your world, but because something inside you already is. There's a shift happening, quiet, subtle, almost invisible if you're not paying attention. But you feel it, don't you? That tension in your chest, that distance from things that used to excite you, that strange sense that your life is on the edge of something you can't fully explain. This isn't random, and it's not something to fear. It's something to understand. Because what's about to hit your life isn't an event, it's a realization. A turning point that doesn't arrive with noise, but with clarity. And once it begins, you won't see things the same way again. You may have noticed it already. You don't fit where you used to fit. Conversations feel shallow. Old routines feel heavy. Places that once felt familiar now feel distant. Almost like they belong to a version of you that no longer exists. And that can be uncomfortable. Sometimes even lonely. But what you're experiencing isn't loss. It's separation from what no longer aligns with who you're becoming. Growth doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like confusion. Like isolation. Like questioning everything you once believed about yourself. You start asking deeper questions. Why do I feel this way? Why am I changing? Why does everything feel different, even when nothing around me has changed? And the truth is, something has changed. You have. Not in a dramatic overnight way, but in layers, in awareness, in the way you see people, the way you react to situations, the way you value your time, your energy, your peace. You're becoming more aware of what drains you, and what actually matters, and that awareness changes everything. This is why things feel like they're shifting. You can't go back to pretending. You can't go back to ignoring what doesn't feel right. You can't go back to being the version of yourself that tolerated less, accepted less, and questioned less. And that's where the real transformation begins. Not when everything around you changes, but when you do. There's a moment in every person's life where they begin to outgrow their past. Not because they're trying to, but because they're ready to. Ready for deeper conversations. Ready for more meaningful connections. Ready to understand themselves on a level they've been avoiding for years. And when that moment comes, it doesn't ask for permission. It disrupts comfort. It challenges Pravicini patterns. It forces you to slow down and look inward. That's why it can feel overwhelming. Because you're not just moving forward, you're shedding. Letting go of versions of yourself that once felt necessary. Letting go of environments that once felt safe. Letting go of expectations that were never truly yours. And in that process, you may feel like you're losing control. But what you're actually doing is gaining clarity. Clarity about who you are. Clarity about what you want. Clarity about what you're no longer willing to carry. And that clarity is powerful. Because once you have it, you start making different choices. You start protecting your energy. You start choosing peace over pressure. You start walking away from things that don't feel aligned, even if they once did. That's not weakness. That's awareness. And awareness changes the direction of your life in ways that nothing else can. So if you've been feeling this shift, like something big is happening beneath the surface, you're not imagining it. You're evolving. And evolution doesn't always look exciting in the moment. Sometimes it looks like silence. Like distance. Like sitting alone, thinking deeper than you ever have before. But those moments are where everything begins. Because when you understand yourself, you start rebuilding your life with intention. Not based on habits, not based on expectations, but based on truth. Your truth. So don't rush this process. Don't try to force clarity before it naturally arrives. And don't go back to what felt comfortable, just because this feels unfamiliar. You're not lost. You're transitioning. And transitions are uncomfortable because they require you to leave behind what you've known, before fully stepping into what's next. But trust this, you're not stepping into nothing. You're stepping into something more aligned, more aware, and more real. Take a breath, give yourself permission to grow. Give yourself space to change. And most importantly, give yourself patience. Because what's unfolding in your life right now isn't something to fear, it's something to understand and embrace. If this message found you at the right time, take a moment and reflect on where you are in your journey. Drop a comment and share what's been shifting in your life recently. And if you're ready to keep growing, keep questioning, and keep evolving, subscribe to Return to Awakening, because this is just the beginning. And the deeper you go into this phase, the more you start noticing something else. Your reactions are changing. Things that once triggered you don't hit the same way anymore. Situations that used to drain you now just reveal themselves for what they are. You observe more. You don't feel the need to respond to everything. And that shift is quiet power, because most people live on autopilot, reacting without thinking, following patterns they've never questioned, repeating cycles they don't even realize they're stuck in. But you're starting to see the pattern, not just in others, in yourself. You're catching your own habits in real time. The way you overthink, the way you doubt, the way you sometimes shrink yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. And for the first time, you're not ignoring it, you're facing it. That's not easy, because self-awareness comes with responsibility. Once you see it, you can't pretend you don't. And that's where many people turn back. They distract themselves. They numb the feeling. They go back to old environments just to feel familiar again. But you didn't. Or at least, something in you didn't let you. That quiet voice inside you kept saying, something isn't right anymore. And instead of silencing it, you listened. That changes everything. Because now you're no longer living unconsciously. You're choosing. Even if it's messy, even if it's slow, even if you're still figuring things out, you're choosing awareness over comfort, and that's a rare decision. There's also something else you might be feeling, a strange pull towards solitude, not because you want to disconnect from the world completely, but because you need space to understand yourself without noise, without expectations, without outside opinions shaping your thoughts. And in that solitude, you start hearing things more clearly. Your thoughts, your instincts, your truth. It's in those quiet moments where the real shifts happen. Not when you're surrounded by distractions, not when you're trying to keep up with everyone else, but when you're alone, reflecting. That's where you start asking better questions. Not, why is this happening to me? But what is this trying to show me? That one shift in perspective changes everything. Because now you're not a victim of change, you're a participant in your own growth. And growth isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it reveals things you wish you didn't see. Truths about people, truths about your environment, and sometimes truths about yourself. But those truths are necessary. Because without them, there is no real change, only repetition. And you're breaking out of that, slowly, quietly, but powerfully. There will be days where you question this entire process. Days where you feel like going back. Back to what's easy, back to what's predictable. Back to the version of you that didn't think this deeply. But even if you tried, you couldn't fully return. Because once awareness enters your life, it doesn't leave. It stays with you, guiding you, challenging you, pushing you to become more honest with yourself. And honesty is where real transformation lives. So when you feel that internal pressure building, when you feel like something is shifting and you can't explain it, escape it, sit with it. There's something there for you to understand. Something that could change the direction of your life, not overnight, but over time. In the way you think, the way you choose, the way you show up for yourself. And that kind of change is the kind that lasts. And as this continues, you may start to notice a quiet detachment forming. Not coldness, not indifference, but clarity. You begin to see people as they are, not just as you hoped they would be. You begin to recognize patterns without needing to fix them. You begin to accept that not everything is yours to carry. And that realization can feel heavy at first, because you've spent so much time being understanding, being patient, giving more than you received. But now, something inside you is recalibrating. You're no longer trying to earn peace, you're choosing it, and that shift changes how you move through the world. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't listen. You stop chasing validation from places that never gave it. You stop shrinking just to keep the peace. Instead, you become more grounded, more aware of your boundaries, more intentional with your energy. And yes, some people will notice, not always in a positive way, Because when you change, the dynamics around you change too. People who benefited from the old version of you may feel uncomfortable with the new one. They may question you, misunderstand you, even distance themselves, and that can sting. But not every distance is a loss. Some distance is alignment for something more honest, more balanced, more real. You're not here to be everything for everyone. You're here to be real with yourself. And sometimes, that requires letting go without resentment, without anger, just with understanding. Because not everyone is meant to walk with you into the next version of your life. And that's okay. What matters is that you don't abandon yourself in the process. That you don't go back to who you were just to keep others comfortable. Because deep down, you already know what that feels like. And you've outgrown it. There's also a deeper layer to this shift. One that's less about what you're leaving behind, and more about what you're stepping into. A stronger sense of self, not based on opinions, not based on approval, but based on awareness. You begin to trust your instincts more. That quiet feeling in your chest when something doesn't feel right, you listen to it. That sense of peace when something aligns with you, you honor it. You stop second-guessing everything. You stop looking outside for answers you can feel within. And that's powerful. Because when you trust yourself, you move differently. You make decisions with more clarity. You walk away faster from what drains you. You invest deeper in what truly matters. And over time, your life begins to reflect that. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in subtle, meaningful shifts. Your circle changes. Your habits evolve. Your priorities become clearer. You find yourself choosing depth over distraction, meaning over noise, growth over comfort. And even though the path isn't always easy, a quiet confidence that starts building within you. A sense that you're finally moving in a direction that feels true. Not perfect, but real. And that feeling is something you can't fake. It comes from facing yourself, from sitting with discomfort instead of running from it, from choosing awareness again and again, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it asks more from you than you expected. But that's the nature of real change. It doesn't just adjust your life on the surface. It reshapes how you see everything. And once that process begins, it keeps unfolding, layer by layer, insight by insight, until one day, you look back and realize you're not who you used to be, not because you forced it, but because you allowed yourself to grow. And somewhere in that realization, something else becomes clear. You're not chasing the same things anymore. What once felt important now feels distant. What once defined you no longer holds the same weight. It's not that those things were wrong. It's that you've outgrown needing them in the same way. You start to understand that not everything you once desired was truly aligned with who you are becoming. Some of it was learned. Some of it was influenced. Some of it was simply a reflection of where you were at the time. And there's no shame in that. Because growth isn't about judging your past. It's about understanding it and moving forward with awareness. You begin to release the pressure to prove something, to be seen a certain way, to meet expectations that were never fully yours. Instead, you move with intention. You speak with more honesty. You act with more alignment. You choose with more clarity. And that creates a different kind of life. Not louder, not more chaotic, but more grounded, more peaceful, more real. There's also a shift in how you handle uncertainty. Before, the unknown felt uncomfortable. You needed answers. You needed control. You needed to know exactly where things were going. But now, you're learning to sit in the in-between. That space where things aren't fully clear yet, where outcomes haven't revealed themselves, where you're still becoming, but not quite there. And instead of panicking, you observe. You trust the process of unfolding, not blindly, but with patience, because you've started to understand something most people avoid. Not everything needs to be figured out immediately. Some things reveal themselves only when you're ready to see them. And readiness doesn't come from rushing. It comes from growth, from experience, from going through moments that stretch your understanding of yourself and the world around you. So instead of forcing clarity, you allow it. You give things time to make sense. You give yourself space to process. And in that space, you start to feel more at ease with where you are, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not fully clear. Because deep down, you know you're moving, you're not stuck, you're evolving. There's also a quiet strength building within you, one that doesn't need to be announced, one that doesn't need validation. It shows up in small ways, in the way you walk away from what no longer feels right, in the way you protect your peace without explaining yourself, in the way you stay grounded, even when things around you feel uncertain. That strength isn't loud, but it's real, and it's becoming part of who you are. You're no longer reacting from impulse, you're responding from awareness. You're no longer chasing every opportunity, you're choosing what aligns. You're no longer trying to hold everything together, you're allowing what doesn't belong to fall away, and that takes courage, more than most people realize, because letting go isn't easy, even when you know it's necessary, even when you know it's right. There's still a part of you that remembers what it felt like before, that comfort, that familiarity, that version of life that didn't require this level of awareness. Come this far to go back. Not fully, because now you can see, and once you truly see, you start to live differently. You stop settling for less than what feels true. You stop ignoring what your intuition is showing you. You stop betraying yourself just to maintain what's comfortable. And that shift, it's everything. It's the foundation of a life that actually reflects who you are. Not who you were told to be. Not who you felt pressured to become. But who you've discovered yourself to be, through experience, through reflection, through growth. And that discovery is still unfolding. And as it continues to unfold, you begin to notice something even deeper. You're becoming more present, not in a forced perfect way, but in a real grounded way. You start catching yourself in moments you used to rush past. The silence between conversations, the feeling of your own breath, the way your mind tries to pull you into worry, and how you gently bring it back. That awareness creates space, space between thought and reaction, space between emotion and action, space where you finally have a choice. And that choice is where your power is. Because before, so much of your life may have been automatic, driven by habits, by expectations, by patterns you didn't even question. But now, you're awake enough to pause, to ask yourself, is this really me? Is this how I want to respond? Is this aligned with who I'm becoming? And sometimes the answer surprises you. Sometimes it asks you to take a different path than the one you're used to. Silent. To stay silent when you would have reacted. To walk away when you would have stayed. Those moments may seem small, but they are everything. Because they are the building blocks of a new identity. Not one created by force, but one shaped by conscious decisions. Over time, those decisions begin to redefine you. Not just in your actions, but in your energy. People feel it, even if they can't explain it. There's a difference in how you carry yourself, in how you respond, in how you no longer get pulled into the same cycles. And that difference comes from within. It comes from the work you've been doing quietly, the reflection no one sees, the battles you fought internally, the moments you chose growth, even when it would have been easier to avoid it. That's real strength, not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that transforms you from the inside out. And here's something you may not have fully realized yet. You're becoming more comfortable with yourself. Not just the parts you like, but the parts you once tried to hide. Your doubts, your past mistakes, your imperfections. You're starting to see them differently, not as flaws that define you, but as experiences that shaped you. And instead of running from them, you're integrating them, learning from them, growing through them. That's a different kind of healing. One that doesn't pretend everything is perfect, but understands that everything has a place in your growth. And as you accept yourself more, you stop needing the world to validate you. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop depending on external approval to feel okay. Because you're building something stronger internally. A sense of self that isn't easily shaken. A sense of worth that isn't tied to opinions. A sense of peace that doesn't rely on everything going your way. And that inner stability changes how you experience life. Challenges don't break you the same way. Setbacks don't define you the same way. Uncertainty doesn't scare you the same way. Because you know something now that you didn't fully understand before, you can handle it. Not because you have all the answers, but because you trust yourself to figure things out. Step by step, moment by moment. And that trust is one of the most powerful things you can build, because it keeps you grounded, even when everything around you feels like it's shifting. It reminds you that no matter what changes externally, you're not the same person you used to be. You're more aware, more intentional, more aligned, and that alignment, it's guiding you forward, even in moments where the path isn't fully clear, even in moments where doubt tries to creep in. There's something steady within you now, something that wasn't as strong before, something that continues to grow every time you choose awareness over avoidance, every time you choose truth over comfort, every time you choose yourself in a way you never did before. And with each of those choices, something subtle but undeniable starts to happen. Your life begins to simplify, not because everything becomes easy, but because you stop carrying what was never truly yours. You stop over-explaining, you stop over-giving, you stop overthinking every single outcome as if it's the only chance you'll ever get. And in that simplicity, there's relief. A kind of quiet breathing space you didn't realize you needed until you finally felt it. It's not emptiness, it's clarity. Because when your mind is no longer cluttered with unnecessary noise, you start noticing what actually matters. You notice who brings peace into your life and who drains it. You notice what energizes you and what exhausts you. You notice where your presence feels natural and where it feels forced. And those observations don't come from judgment. They come from awareness, a deeper kind of honesty with yourself, one that doesn't rely on labels or explanations, just truth. And truth has a way of changing direction without warning, not in chaos, but in alignment. You may find yourself pulling away from things you once felt attached to, not out of anger, not out of rejection, but out of understanding. You simply no longer resonate the same way. And that realization can feel strange at first, because part of you remembers how things used to feel, the familiarity, the patterns, the version of you that once belonged there. But growth doesn't ask for permission to make you uncomfortable. It just continues unfolding, and as it does, you begin to notice something even more powerful. Your standards are changing, not in a demanding way, but in a self-respecting way. You no longer tolerate what drains your peace just because it's familiar. You no longer stay in situations that require you to constantly shrink yourself. You no longer ignore your intuition just to maintain comfort for others. And that shift is not loud, because it marks the moment where self-abandonment starts to end, and self-respect begins to take its place. You might not even announce it to anyone, but internally, you know. You feel it when you hesitate before saying yes to something that doesn't feel right. You feel it when you pause before entering old patterns. You feel it when you choose silence instead of unnecessary explanation. And those small moments are rebuilding you. Not into someone new, but into someone more honest, more aware, more connected to their own inner compass. And over time, that inner compass becomes stronger than external influence, stronger than pressure, stronger than expectation, stronger than fear of being misunderstood. Because you realize something very important. Not everyone will understand your growth, and they don't have to. Because this process is not about being understood by everyone. It's about understanding yourself deeply enough that outside noise no longer pulls you away from your center. And once you reach that point, your decisions become quieter, but more powerful. You stop reacting to everything. You stop explaining everything. You start choosing peace, even when it's not the most dramatic option. And in that peace, you begin to feel something steady building inside you. A sense of emotional maturity that doesn't rush to fix everything. A sense of calm that doesn't collapse under pressure. A sense of presence that doesn't depend on external validation. And it's in that state that life starts to feel different. Not because everything around you is perfect, but because you are no longer the same person experiencing it. And that change, it keeps deepening. And the deeper it goes, the more you start realizing something very simple, yet very powerful. You are no longer willing to abandon yourself just to feel accepted. That old version of you, the one that bent, adjusted, tolerated, and stayed quiet just to keep things stable, is slowly losing control over your decisions. Not all at once, but gradually, in real-time moments. When you say no without guilt. When you walk away without explaining everything. When you stop forcing connections that feel one-sided. And each of those moments reinforces something new inside you. Self-respect is not an idea anymore. It's becoming a habit. And habits shape identity. You may not notice the shift day by day, but over time you start to feel it. The way you no longer chase conversations that drain you. The way you no longer overextend your energy just to be understood. The way you no longer feel responsible for fixing everything around you. There's a quiet liberation in that. Because you're finally stepping out of roles you never consciously chose, but once lived inside for years. The fixer, the pleaser, the overthinker, the one who always stays even when things don't feel right. And now, something in you is rewriting those roles, not with rebellion, but with awareness. You start to see that not every situation requires your participation, not every emotional weight is yours to carry, not every silence needs to be filled with explanation. And this realization doesn't make you distant. It makes you selective. You become more intentional with where your energy goes. You stop scattering yourself across too many emotional spaces, and instead, you begin to gather yourself, piece by piece, moment by moment. And in that presence, there's something unfamiliar, but grounding. A sense that you are finally here with yourself, instead of constantly leaving yourself to manage everything else. That shift changes your inner world in ways people on the outside might not fully understand. They may still see you as the same person, but internally, you are not the same. Your reactions are different. Your patience has depth now, not just tolerance. Your silence carries thought, not avoidance. Your presence feels more deliberate, less scattered, and because of that, you begin to move through life with a different kind of confidence. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence, but grounded confidence. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself, the kind that simply exists in how you choose, how you respond, and how you carry yourself. And one of the most powerful parts of this transformation is that you start trusting your own pace. You stop comparing your timeline to others. You stop measuring your progress by external milestones alone, because you start to understand something deeper. Growth is not always visible in achievements. Sometimes it's visible in what you no longer tolerate. Sometimes it's visible in the peace you protect. Sometimes it's visible in the silence you no longer fear. And that kind of growth is quiet, but irreversible. Because once you've seen yourself differently, you can't fully go back to how you used to see everything. And in that deeper awareness, you begin to notice something else shifting too. Your relationship with time starts to change. You stop feeling like everything needs to happen immediately. You stop rushing yourself into outcomes just to feel ahead. You stop panicking when things are still unfolding. Instead, you begin to understand timing in a different way, but as process. There are things that only become clear when you've lived through enough silence to understand them. There are lessons that don't reveal themselves in urgency, but in patience. There are answers that don't appear when you force them, but when you're finally still enough to receive them. And for the first time, you stop fighting that process. You allow things to breathe. You allow yourself to breathe, even when uncertainty is present, even when clarity hasn't fully arrived, even when part of you still wants quick resolution. Because something deeper in you knows, forcing what isn't ready only creates confusion. But allowing things to unfold naturally creates understanding. And that understanding is what you're starting to value more than control. You also begin to see how much energy you once spent trying to predict outcomes, running scenarios in your mind, overanalyzing conversations, replaying moments that are already gone. And slowly, that mental noise starts to lose its grip, not because your mind becomes silent overnight, but because you stop feeding every thought with unnecessary importance. You start distinguishing between what deserves attention and what doesn't. And that distinction is powerful, because it gives you space back. Mental space, emotional space. And in that space, you start hearing yourself more clearly. Not the version of you shaped by fear or pressure, but the version of you that simply knows what feels aligned. That quiet knowing becomes more reliable than overthinking, more grounded than analysis, more truthful than assumption. And the more you trust it, the stronger it becomes. You may still have moments of doubt, moments where old patterns try to return. You question your direction, moments where uncertainty feels heavy again. But even in those moments, something in you responds differently now. Instead of spiraling, you pause. Instead of reacting immediately, you observe. Instead of abandoning yourself, you return inward. And that return is everything, because it shows you that you are no longer fully identified with every thought that passes through you. You are no longer controlled by every emotional wave. You are beginning to witness your own experience rather than be consumed by it. And that shift alone changes how you live. It changes how you relate to people. It changes how you handle pressure. It changes how you move through uncertainty. You become less reactive and more grounded, less scattered and more centered, less influenced by noise and more guided by inner clarity. And even though life itself doesn't become perfect, your experience of it becomes more stable, more intentional, more aligned with who you are becoming. And as that alignment deepens, you start to realize something quietly profound. You were never truly lost. You were just becoming aware. And that awareness continues to expand in ways you didn't expect. You start noticing patterns not just in your thoughts, but in your entire life experience. The same situations that used to repeat begin to feel less frequent. The same emotional triggers that once controlled you begin to lose intensity. The same confusion that once felt overwhelming starts to feel more manageable. Not because life becomes simpler, but because you become clearer. And clarity changes how you interpret everything. You no longer jump to conclusions as quickly. You no longer assume meaning from every small detail. You no longer let uncertainty define your emotional state. Instead, give things space to reveal themselves. And that patience creates something powerful inside you. A sense of emotional stability that doesn't rely on external conditions. Even when things are uncertain, you remain more centered. Even when answers are delayed, you remain more grounded. Even when life feels unpredictable, you don't immediately lose yourself in it. And that ability is something you've been building quietly, without even realizing it. Through every moment of reflection, through every time you chose awareness over reaction, through every instance you paused instead of spiraling, you've been strengthening something internal, not loudly, but consistently. And now, it's beginning to show. You may notice that your conversations are changing. You speak with more intention. You listen with more presence. You respond without unnecessary urgency. There's less need to prove your point, less need to be understood immediately, less need to fill every silence. And in that space, something different emerges. Understanding without pressure, connection without force, presence without performance. And it feels more real than anything you've experienced in the past versions of your life. Because you're no longer performing a role. You're simply being, and being, in its purest form, is enough. There's also a shift happening in how you view your past. Things that once felt heavy start to feel like chapters that shaped you rather than defined you. You stop rewriting your story with regret. You start reading it with understanding. Not everything was meant to be perfect. Not every decision was meant to be ideal. Some experiences were simply necessary for awareness to grow. And now, you can see that, not with judgment, but with perspective. And that perspective softens something inside you. It reduces the weight you've been unknowingly carrying. It frees you from unnecessary self-criticism. It allows you to see yourself not as someone who failed to get it right, but as someone who was learning in real time. And learning takes time. You also begin to notice something subtle in your relationships. You no longer force closeness. You no longer chase validation. You no longer invest energy into connections that feel one-sided. Instead, you allow relationships to reveal their natural place in your life. Some deepen, some fade, some remain unchanged, and you stop resisting that flow as much. Because you're beginning to understand not everything is meant to stay, and not everything is meant to go, but everything has meaning in the way it moves through your life. And that acceptance brings a different kind of peace, one that isn't dependent on control, but on trust. Trust that what is aligned will remain in some form, and what isn't will naturally fall away, without force, without struggle, without constant questioning. And in that trust, you begin to feel something quietly steady forming within you, a sense that you are no longer being pulled in every direction,